Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome back to Final Trade. 1 year ago, I made a version of this video talking about the long-term price action of Pokemon booster boxes over a 11-12 year period, and now this is an update to that 1 year later. So what I've done is I've gone through, I've taken all the boxes from the black and white era, the XY era, the Sun and Moon era, and new for this year's version of the video, I've added the Sword and Shield era. And so this next column here, I have the original release dates, and then I've gone through today on TCG Player, and I've taken the current price. Now, what does that mean? First, I look to see if the product has a market price. And of course, TCG Player's market price is an average of up to the last 50 sales prices. And for products that had no market data, meaning that none of them had sold recently enough to compute a market price, I highlighted those yellow, and instead I just took the lowest ask price, meaning the lowest price from any of the sellers offering one up for sale. And then if there were none for sale and there was no market data, I highlighted it red. So this year there were two that were red, no market data, no recent sales. And there were these, again, that had no market data from recent sales, but there were boxes for sale. And then I computed the compound annual growth rate. Now, compound annual growth rate is what is the 1% number that is your compound year-over-year growth rate for every year you've had this item. And so going from the original release date out to the day I've taken these data today, October 23rd, 2023, and assuming you had bought the original box at $100 and that now it was worth whatever is in this column, that means that you had gotten this compound annual growth rate. Every year that you held this product, it was worth this percentage more than it was at the beginning of that year. And then what I've done is I've said, what's the average for this Pokemon era? So I've just taken the average of these numbers, and yeah, average of compound annual growth rates, mathematically it's not quite correct to do that, but I'm just trying to make a point of what does it kind of look like over that entire era. Now, also into these compound annual growth rate calculations, I factored in an assumed selling fee of 12.5%. I get complaints from people from time to time saying, oh, Craig, you don't count seller's fees. Seller fees will just eat you alive. I've done analyses before that show that no, they don't. The longer you hold an asset, the less the seller fee matters, to the point where essentially you can discount it. I just go ahead and put it in on this analysis because it's just a tiny bit more code to do the calculation. And then I can kind of silence those people who think that seller fees really matter in the long run. So assuming those worst cases, you had to buy the box on release date. You couldn't wait until, say, 2 years later when it's about to go out of print. And you had to buy it at $100, not the more typical $80 to $90 to $100 price range that we get to buy most Pokemon boxes at. And you had to pay those 12.5% fees. Here's what the compound annual growth rates look like. And so you can see for the black and white era, we had an average of 37% compound annual growth rate. For the XY era, the average is 28%. For the Sun and Moon era, 36% on average. And adding the Sword and Shield era so far, 18% on average. Now, there's a couple things to talk about with the Sword and Shield era. One is compound annual growth rate calculations get kind of wonky on a short time scale. And some of these sets you can see are not even a year old yet. And then also there are still boxes of about half of these Sword and Shield era sets still available on the Pokemon Center website for MSRP. And so to a great extent, that's putting kind of a glass ceiling over the price of these boxes right now. So I wanted to put these into this analysis this year, so when I come back next October and I look at this in 2024, we have this snapshot of what it was now. But there are those couple of factors that kind of prevent the Sword and Shield data from being completely meaningful right now. And then I just took the total average of all of the boxes across all four of those eras, 29.5% compound annual growth rate. So if you had just bought on release day some number of boxes at $100 each of every one of these things for the last 12 years, your total return, if you sold all of it today at current market prices, you paid 12.5% fees, your total compound return over the whole period would have been 29.5%. And to put that into context, when people talk about stock market investing, you know, the S&P 500 index typically returns somewhere around 8 to 10 to 12% per year, depending on how you calculate it with fees and reinvested dividends and some other assumptions. But 8 to 10 to 12 is kind of the baseline of what we consider really good. You know, if you just invest all of your retirement savings into an S&P 500 index ETF, you'll do really well and you'll have a nice retirement. And yet, here we are with CAGRs in the 20s, 30%, some of these sets 40% CAGRs, the averages in the 28% range, and the overall average for all of these, even including the Sword and Shield era sets, where again, the box prices are being artificially held down by Pokemon Center, still selling through its inventory at MSRP. Even then, the average is 29.5%. And this underscores something that I talk about from time to time with collectibles and TCG investing. It's that you don't have to be good at this. You cast a wide, thin net, and you have to be patient. And this is the return for Pokemon. These are the data. And there are some voices out there who will say things like, well, it was never meant to be this way. Or, no one makes money in collectibles. Well, I mean, if you're not patient, you probably won't make money. But if you are patient, then what we've seen is that over the last 12, 13 years, Pokemon has returned 2 to 3 times the rate of return of the S&P 500. And again, this is with worst case assumptions. It's that you had to buy on release day. You had to pay $100 per box. You had to pay the 12.5% seller's fees. You know, even with everything like that, we see how well Pokemon booster boxes perform. Now, I've gone ahead and added these for each era just to show the best, the second best, the second worst, and the worst performers, what their CAGRs were, just so you can kind of, you know, get an idea. Because, yeah, Evolving Skies has returned 83% compound annual growth rate. We kind of, we don't really expect that to hold long term. I mean, eventually the demand for graded copies of Moonbryon will be exhausted, and this will mediate back down to something closer to around 30% over the years. But we also don't expect that Battle Styles will remain a negative compound annual growth rate for long. And so that's why I've included the second best and second worst, just so you can kind of get an idea of, hey, if we take out the best and the worst, which, and I hate to use the word outlier because it's a very nuanced word in statistics, but if you take those out, what do the next best and worst ones look like that may be a little more indicative of that era? And then, of course, you have the average for the era. Now, these next couple of columns, I've just preserved what were the prices when I did this analysis a year ago, October 8th, 2022. And then I've computed the 1 year percent change in price from then to now. And so some of these are missing because, well, today we have no market data for these two sets, and a year ago we had no market data for these two sets. So those are empty for that reason, but the rest of them have data in them. And then I preserved what the compound annual growth rate was at the time that I did these analyses a year ago. And the interesting thing that you can see by comparing the 1 year percentage change to last year's compound annual growth rate is you can say, did the last 12 months from October 22 to October 23 meet or lag or exceed the performance of the previous lifetime? And so if you had previously gotten 35.4% compound annual growth rate from this box, well, in the last year, you only got 2% in the last 12 months. And so the last 12 months of performance of this box greatly lagged the previous lifetime performance. But on some of these, like this one, the ones highlighted green, you can see that just this last year exceeded the previous lifetime performance. And this was something I was really interested in to see this analysis updated after 1 year, was would the general malaise in the wider economy, the TCG bear market and the small Pokemon bear market that we're seeing right now cause a lot of these boxes to underperform their previous lifetime performance. And what we see by the number of them that are highlighted green is not really. So 7 of them in the XY era had performance in the last 12 months that exceeded their previous lifetime performance. Again, 7 of them in the Sun and Moon era were the same. And 2, 4, 6 out of the 7 that we have data for, only 1 exceeded the lifetime performance in the last 12 months. Now, you have to, again, look at the nuance of this. If you had these Plasma Storm boxes and you were used to getting a 52% compound annual growth rate and you only got a 24% growth rate in the last 12 months, nobody's crying for you. 24% still beats the crap out of the stock market. So keep that in mind, that just because it underperformed its previous lifetime performance, well, that's not too terrible. And even on these, let's see, this one, it was down 18% over the last 12 months. But if you had bought it on release day, your compound annual growth rate as of today is still nearly 37%. And going back to what I said a little bit ago about you don't need to be good, you don't need to be smart, you just need to be patient, and you need to cast the wide, thin net. You know, the greatest hedge fund managers in all of Wall Street history cannot touch 37% average CAGR, 28% average, 36% average, 29% average. And people could do this just by buying boxes full of cardboard squares with pictures of fighting animals on them. Just by doing that, you would beat the performance of the most legendary hedge fund managers in Wall Street history. And so when you hear those voices that say things like the easy money is done, there's no more opportunity, you know, there's too many investors, it was never meant to be like this, collectibles don't give good returns, things like that. These are the data. I don't make statements like that. I let the data do the talking. And these are the data. These are the returns. So just keep that in mind. I'm always an advocate of casting the wide, thin net, buying a little bit of everything, because you don't know in the future which sets are going to be in evolving skies and which of them are going to be a darkness ablaze. So in the long run, you're probably not smart enough to pick the winners consistently. I know I'm certainly not smart enough to do that. And so I cast the wide, thin net and I buy a little bit of everything. And as we can see now, 1 year on from the first time I did this analysis, the prices hold up. The gains hold up. The long-term compound annual growth rates hold up, even under all of these worst assumptions that I put into this analysis. And one more thing on the whole idea that markets were never meant to be this way. You know, markets do not have a default state of meant to be. Markets are the amalgamation of the wealth-weighted average of the desires of all the participants. What kind of money are they willing to spend to acquire assets? That's what creates markets. There is no meant to be in there. There's simply what a market is. What is the price? What is the price today of a box of Plasma Storm compared to what you bought it for in February of 2013? And how does that compute the compound annual growth rate? There is no meant to be. There's only what the data say is. Thanks to everyone who makes this content possible, especially my great supporters on Patreon. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and join me on Final Trade.